Hey, Brother Dave here. Welcome back in our defense of Genesis. It's time for round number 5, evidence of a young universe. That's right, it's God's word, 6,000 years, versus man's word, 15 billion years, give or take a billion. Now, you recall from our last lesson that we talked about how we got to this belief in the first place, both secular and Christian. And we also looked at the foundation of the secular beliefs in deep time and based on some of those supposedly objective tests. And what we saw in our last lesson was that we pretty much destroyed the foundation of a belief in deep time based on historical science. Now, where do we look for evidence that the Bible is correct? Evidence of a young universe. Well, you recall from our first lesson, we turn to the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, and gird our loins in truth. That being from Romans 1:20, it tells us, "For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." So we're going to go look at God's creation for evidence that clearly shows how he told us he made this universe. In other words, we're going to look at God's creation and say, could it really be 6,000 years? Because if it's not 6,000 years, then the Bible is just a book of stories. And remember why we're here. It's to get away from that book of stories stuff and help our kids out. You see, when we send our kids to Sunday school and we teach them the Bible as if it was just a bunch of stories, they then go out into the world and they're confronted by movies, books, TV, friends, teachers, and school books, all taking aim at those Bible stories that they learned in church. They hear things like, all those animals couldn't possibly fit on the ark, or all the rock layers were laid down by millions of years. Yeah, that's right, Noah's flood is just a myth, and the Bible just plain isn't true. And they come back to Sunday school, and what do they hear? Oh, just trust in Jesus anyway. And by the time our kids get halfway grown up or heading off to college, they are just not buying it. They're out of here. Now, here's a book that might interest you called Already Gone, written by Ken Ham and Britt Bremer. They studied this issue very closely. That is, why so many professing Christian children are walking away from their faith. If you remember from the first presentation, that statistic is between 70 and 80% of professing Christian kids walk away from their faith within 1 year after high school. So Ken and Britt did some extensive polling, posing questions to a lot of kids to find out, okay, why are you leaving? Now, first they asked the question, at what age did you begin to really question the contents in the Bible? Now notice the middle school and high school figures. Yep, the vast majority long before they left home for college. Why? Because the seeds of doubt were already planted long before they left for college. College was just where those seeds finally bore fruit, mostly rotten fruit. See, they go from questioning to unbelief, just like Eve did in the Garden of Eden when Satan said, "Is that what God really said?" And once Eve started to doubt God's word, she lost belief and she rebelled. And our children repeat that first sin again and again and again. And then they asked them this question. They said, if you don't believe now, then when did you first have doubts? And notice again, it's middle school and high school. Okay, so what were the key things that they were having doubts about? And the top three answers were, first of all, the age of the earth and the universe. Second, too many rules. Oh, okay. And third, the creation account. So you notice that numbers 1 and 3 come straight out of Genesis. Number 2, too many rules. Well, this speaks to us directly regarding Jesus' warning to his disciples about the leaven of the Pharisees. See, when you go beyond the Ten Commandments and the two great commandments of Jesus, then you're adding some things that just don't belong in the Bible, and the kids don't understand it. Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah, we don't prepare our kids very well for the world, even though the Bible tells us to always be ready to give an answer, defense, to everyone who asks you reason for the hope that you have. We have to give that defense to our children. And when our kids come into our Sunday school classes and into our homes, we need to teach them the flood account as real history and not as simply a story. Also, the same for the creation and the Tower of Babel. And be careful not to use that word story as it implies fiction, but instead use phrases like the flood event or the account of creation. You see, when we teach the Bible as history, we convey the truth of it. That the ark was plenty big enough to hold all those animals. That the mechanism for the flood would have wiped out everything on the face of the earth, and that same mechanism would have laid down the rock layers that dug out the Grand Canyon. That's what we need to teach our children, connecting the Bible to the real world that they live in. And when we use biblical history to do that, then they have real answers. And our kids will have those answers and hopefully have the ability to stand firm in their faith in this culture that attacks the very foundations of that faith. And if they do, they'll grow up and pass their faith on to their children, your grandchildren, by the way. Yep, 1 Peter 3:15, very important for child rearing today. All right, time for the meat of the lesson. From the last lesson, you recall, we pretty much destroyed the foundations for objective testing that supposedly proved millions and billions of years. But well, how old is the Earth and universe anyway? And when we look at the creation, what is it we're going to see? So let's lay a little groundwork before we get started. And start with the Bible, because we saw in past presentations, when you start with the Bible, then according to the Bible, the Earth is about 6,000 years old. All right, well, can we prove it? Yeah, that's right. We can't just say it and say to our kids, yeah, because I said so. Because, yeah, like I said, they go to school and the secular scientist of secular education comes back and says, 15 billion years, mom and dad are wrong. And boy, that's just what teenage kids want to hear. Yeah, mom and dad are wrong. Oh, Lord, help us. Yeah, I know it seems like it's you against the world when it comes to raising your kids, but let's keep it simple. And remember, for these particular questions, the real battle is over the same evidence and how we interpret the evidence that we see. Where each side starts with opposing assumptions about what really happened in the past. You'll recall the scriptural disagreement with secular science is particularly true when you talk about historical science as opposed to observational science. Recall that in historical science, we look at what we see in the present, compare that to our assumptions about the past, and then draw conclusions. We saw in the last lesson that the idea of millions of years did not come from any new evidence. Recall before radiometric dating in the 1700s, that Scottish scientist James Hutton came up with something new. What was it that he discovered? That's right. Nothing. He discovered absolutely nothing. The only thing he came up with was a new worldview, a new way of interpreting the evidence that we see in the present. But in the introductory lesson on deep time, we saw that the evidence for deep time is only produced by selecting specific observations, assuming uniformitarianism, and believing in the religion of naturalism. Now, in our last lesson, we dealt with defining and debunking uniformitarianism and naturalism as it applies to the concept of deep time, and we just lightly touched on the observations where applying uniformitarianism and naturalism contradicts the conclusions of secular science. You recall that really long list we showed you last time. Well, here it is once again. So today we're going to take a look at some of those observations in much more detail. And most observations tell us that the Earth is not that old, certainly not billions of years. And in fact, 90% of observationally scientific dating methods that you could use contradict the secular worldview of a godless and billion-year-old universe. They all give us ages that are much, much less than a billion years as the upper limit of how old the Earth and the universe are. Well, now, what do I mean by the upper limit? Let's take a look at that. Now, as we go through all these evidences, and there are about 25, 26 of them, remember that what we're giving you are the upper limits for the ages predicted, not the lower limits. So if any of these methods say that the Earth or universe cannot possibly be older than, say, a million years, it does not mean that they cannot possibly also be much younger. They could be much younger than the upper limit. We're not defining lower limits other than the 6,000 years that the Bible gives us. Now, nowhere in most of the rest of this lesson we will invoke our worldview of the all-powerful, all-knowing, ever-present God or Creator of all that is, was, and ever shall be. Famous last words. Even so, we will see that the argument for deep time, millions and billions of years, is absurd and even unscientific. When we destroy the argument for deep time, we also destroy the argument for evolution, leaving biblical history as the only thing that makes sense. Yep, 6,000 years. And I like this quote from John Morris in his book Young Earth. He says, "We can use the set of assumptions employed by old Earth advocates and demonstrate internal inconsistencies in their way of thinking. When we do that, the weight of the evidence, even using their assumptions, points towards a young Earth and universe." Which finally brings us to the real meat, and I mean at this time of this lesson, eat the meat, spit out the bones. We're going to space. Every place outside of the Earth and off in the universe, well, the things that we can look at that say, hey, you know what? This can't possibly be that old. And just a real quick look at the list of everything that we're going to look at today, and everything in green we're going to look at. And we have this printed out for you in black and white so you can take it home if you want. We're not going to look at white hole cosmology today. That's a whole separate lesson all in itself. White hole cosmology, well, sometimes it's invoked as proof of a young universe. I tend to disagree. It is more proof that the Big Bang didn't work. And hey, if we used white hole cosmology, it would explain the Earth and the universe, including how did starlight get here so quickly. But like I said, another lesson for another time. The rapid rate of change for star evolution is sometimes invoked as proof of a young universe. Not really. It just means the stars change faster. And the horizon problem, which sometimes is invoked as proof of a young universe, is really just proof that there's a problem with the Big Bang. The horizon problem actually says that the universe must be hundreds of billions of years old, and that's going in the wrong direction. I think it's more proof that the Big Bang is wrong. But anyway, that's a list of stuff we're going to look at. Let's get rolling. Well, first, let's talk about galaxies. And the first thing we need to remember is that evolutionists have no idea how these galaxies formed. And we covered that in our lesson on debunking physical evolution. And let's take a look at the prettiest of all galaxies, those spiral galaxies with their beautiful galactic arms, all of them spinning in a clockwise direction. Oh, I'm wrong. By the way, the other day they found one spinning in a counterclockwise direction, which presents whole new problems for the evolutionists, but we'll get into that later. All right, but what you need to realize about this is that the inner stars in this whirlpool galaxy are rotating about the center much faster than the stars that are farther from the center. That being the case, if the galaxies are billions of years old, then we should not see the well-defined spiral galaxies today. they should be much more homogeneous distribution of stars. In fact, this picture of a simulation of 4 revolutions of a galaxy kind of takes us through what we would expect to see. And in looking in that first one, that's less than 20 million years old. In other words, it takes 20 million years for a galaxy to rotate once. We're using the Milky Way or the Andromeda galaxy, our neighbor, as the example there. So what do we see when we look at this? We see, well, we're in stage number 1, less than 20 million years old. After 2 revolutions, you see it starts to smooth out a bit more. 3 revolutions, 4 revolutions, you have a much more homogeneous look to the galaxies. And that's not what we see when we look at all the spiral galaxies that we see in the universe today. Now, a little different way of saying it is that spiral galaxies rotate differentially. Now, all you mechanics out there should understand differential gears. Okay, the inner parts rotate faster than the outer parts. The spiral arms would be twisted beyond recognition in far less than their accepted evolutionary age. So they say, secular scientists, that spiral density waves could solve this problem. Or the solution could simply be that the galaxies are not that old. And brothers and sisters, for everything we come up with, I'll tell you right now, the secular scientists come up with another unproven hypothesis. Well, let's just take another scientific wild-ass guess. Oh, please. Moving right along. So we come to the conclusion that the spiral galaxies we see in the universe could not possibly be older than 20 million years. That's a far cry from 15 billion years, but still a long ways from 6,000 years. But remember, like we said, that's the upper limit. Now next, let's take a look at galaxy clusters. As we look at galaxies, we see that there are galaxy clusters. Now, galaxy clusters are absolutely amazing, and there's so much gravity in these clusters, we actually see the gravity bending and even magnifying light that comes from behind these massive galactic clusters. Here's another even bigger cluster. Now, these galaxy clusters are a little perplexing for cosmologists today. They know there shouldn't even be galaxies out there at all, but since there are galaxies, they shouldn't be grouped together the way they are, and it's one of the thorniest problems in all of cosmology. It's hard to convey the depth of frustration that this simple fact induces among scientists. Unless there are star clusters in there too, because star clusters have the same problem as galactic clusters, and we'll get to that explanation in a minute. But here's a cool looking star cluster. And another good looking one with a beautiful nebula around it. And another star cluster. Man, that's a lot of stars in one little spot right there. But you see, the problem is with star clusters and galaxy clusters, gravity should not hold them together for more than a few million years, let alone 15 billion. You see, these star clusters should have spread out much, much more if billions of years have gone by due to the slingshot effect that occurs when 2 large masses approach each other. They accelerate faster and faster until they sling around each other in a near miss and go zinging off at high, high speeds in a different direction. And we use this slingshot effect to get a lot of our spacecraft and satellites to go off to the different planets all around our solar system. We don't use fuel to get there. We get the fuel to get us up in the air, and then we'll go around the moon and slingshot around the moon and then come back and then go out real ways and then come back and then slingshot around the earth and zoom, off to Mars we go. We use gravity to get us there. And this same slingshot effect occurs with galaxies and stars in clusters. You see, collisions, actual collisions of 2 bodies in space is very, very rare. I mean, there's a lot of space in space. It's a huge vacuum. But when 2 things do approach each other, They feel each other's gravity. They'll start to approach each other going faster, 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 and they'll always, almost always miss each other and then slingshot around each other and then go zooming off at a much higher rate of speed. So that should have happened in all these star clusters and galaxy clusters. They should be much, much more spread out. Yet what we see could not possibly be more than a few million years old. All right, I know that's not 6,000 years yet, but it's still a lot less than 15 billion. All right, we might recall from our first lesson on stars that we never actually have seen a star form. And we don't see them form, but we do see them blow up when their fuel source runs out. And when a star blows up, explodes at the end of its lifetime, that's called a nova. And when a really big star blows up, it's called a supernova. Now, we see one of these supernovas about once every 30 years, and it was real easy to see for scientists because when a supernova goes off, it's brighter than the entire galaxy in which it resides. And even the remnants of supernovas are easily discovered because they continue to radiate massive amounts of X-rays millions of years after the initial explosion. So we should be able to look at the universe. We should be able to see millions or at least thousands and thousands of these supernova remnants if the universe is really 15 billion years old with 11 trillion stars. But how many supernova remnants do we see? 205. What? That's it? So let's think about this now. If they happen every 30 years and we see 205 of them, well, once every 30 years is the rate, so 205 times 30 is bing, 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 cha-ching, 6,000 years. What? Bet you didn't hear about that on the evening news. Well, we're going to give these guys the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe there's a couple supernova remnants we didn't find, and put the upper age limit of supernovas at 7,000 years. And Bubba, that's pretty close to 6,000. And adding insult to injury on this whole supernova explosion, the rate of expansion and the size of these supernova remnants, when we look at the rate of expansion and the size of the supernova remnants for all the ones studied, it indicates that they are all less than 10,000 years old. That's a pretty low upper limit right there. All right, next at bat, blue stars. Now, blue stars are a problem for evolutionists because these very, very massive stars, 25 times bigger than our sun, burn really, really hot and very intensely, which is why they are blue. And they could not last very long because they burn up their fuel very quickly. In fact, about 3 million years is about as long as we expect one of these blue giants to last before it goes supernova on us. Yet we find these blue stars everywhere we look in every galaxy. And as I said, these stars shouldn't last more than a few years. Now, couple this with the fact that we have never seen a star form, and we come to the conclusion that there are way too many of these in the universe if the universe is indeed 15 billion years old. Which brings us to the problem of speedy stars and dwarf galaxies. Kind of reminds me of old Speedy Gonzales cartoon. You remember that? I'm gonna Lady Eva. Woo-hoo! All right, I digress. Anyway, speedy stars are consistent with a young age for the universe. For example, many stars in the dwarf galaxies in a local group are moving away from each other at speeds estimated at 10 to 12 kilometers per second. At these speeds, the stars should have dispersed in about 100 million years, which compared to 14 billion years age of the universe is a very short time. So for speedy stars and dwarf galaxies, we come up with an upper age limit of only 100 million years. All right, let's move a little closer to home. Looking within our own solar system, we have the problem of solar wind and solar drag. What's that, you say, Dave? All right, I'll explain it. All right, first of all, solar wind. Well, the solar wind is actually light and fast-moving particles that are constantly ejected from the sun. And here's what happens. The sun's radiation applies an outward force, and tiny particles, tiny dust particles in our solar system should have long ago been blown out of the solar system. Yet we see it abundantly still orbiting in our solar system. Dust everywhere. It's a dirty solar system, people. Now, besides all the dust we've got in the solar system, there's all kinds of stuff that's bigger than a micron and smaller than a baseball, say. Now, the sun acts like a giant drag, okay, or like a giant vacuum, and it should be sucking up about 100,000 tons of micrometer or micrometeorites every single day. So we would expect most of those to be gone in 10,000 years and all of them to be gone in about 50,000 years. Yet they are still abundant and there's no known source of replenishment, not the Kuiper belt, not the Oort cloud, nothing like that would replenish all this dirty stuff we've got floating around in our solar system. So for solar wind and solar drag, we come up with an upper limit of 10,000 years. And we see this problem in every galaxy and solar system that we can observe. It's an observation that's not unique to our little solar system. Hey, it's a dirty universe out there, people. But don't worry, Jesus is coming to clean things up for us. All right, next problem we run into is the faint sun paradox. That's right, I said faint sun paradox. According to the stellar evolution theory, as the sun's core transforms hydrogen to helium by means of nuclear fusion, the mean molecular weight of the sun increases, which would tend to compress the sun's core, thereby increasing the fusion rate. The upshot is that after several billion years, the sun ought to have brightened by 40% since its formation, or at least 25% since the appearance of life on Earth. So for the latter, that 25% translates into about a 16 to 18 degrees centigrade temperature increase on Earth since life appeared. So if the current average is 15 degrees centigrade, that means that when life formed on Earth, the Earth was a giant snowball at minus 2 degrees centigrade or 28 degrees Fahrenheit for all you rednecks out there. All right. Or anyway, so temperature when life appeared, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a snowball Earth. And we don't see any evidence of that. Now again, for the faint sun paradox, conversely, if we assume the Earth was warm enough for life to appear, then this translates into a 16 to 18 degrees centigrade temperature increase on the Earth since life appeared. So the current average temperature is 15 degrees C, so the Earth should have warmed up to 43 degrees C or 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Average temperature worldwide is what we should see, and we don't see that today. So obviously the Earth cannot be that old, and I believe I have an age limit on that if I can find it here. Faint sun paradox, 100 million years on the faint sun paradox is the upper limit of the age of the sun. All right, next problem, excess internal heat. You know, a lot of these planets, they've got all kinds of internal heat that they just shouldn't have. For example, Jupiter loses heat twice as fast as it gains heat from the sun. It's difficult to explain how this could continue for billions of years. Neptune radiates 2.7 times as much heat as it receives from the sun. Yeah, both Jupiter and Neptune should be basically planet sickles by now, frozen solid after 4.5 billion years. Yet they've still got all this internal heat. Yep, Saturn, Uranus, and now we've studied Venus, all have the same problem for the evolutionist, and this includes Jupiter. And this is consistent with an age of 6,000 years, not 4.5 billion. But we gave them a benefit of a doubt of 1,000 years. We'll put the upper limit at no more than 7,000 years for this one. And what about Pluto's chaotic orbit? The orbit of Pluto is chaotic on a 20 million year timescale, and that should affect the rest of the solar system, which would become unstable on that timescale, suggesting that the solar system has not been around very long. It should be much younger because the orbits of all the planets are currently very stable, which should not be the case with Pluto out there mixing things up. Next topic. Turbulence remaining in Neptune's and Saturn's rings. See, Neptune's rings have thick regions and thin regions, and this unevenness means that they cannot be billions of years old, since collisions of the ring objects would eventually make the ring very uniform. Also for Saturn's rings, the rate of change or disappearance of Saturn's rings is inconsistent with their supposed vast age. Both these cases speak towards youthfulness, and we're going to give them an upper limit of only 10 million years. And now what about the magnetic field strengths we see in the planets around our solar system? Earth falls into this category as well, but we'll talk about that in the next presentation. When there was a Viking or Galileo probe, got to Jupiter back in the late 70s, early 80s, they found that Jupiter's magnetic field was incredibly strong. It should not have been that strong at all. But a guy named Dr. Russ Humphreys had correctly predicted Jupiter's strength based on a 6,000-year-old young universe model. We all know Dr. Russ Humphreys from the Institute of Creation Research. Yes, he predicted the actual strength of Jupiter's magnetic field based on a 6,000-year-old model, and he was absolutely correct. Even though all the scientists, secular scientists, said, "Oh, poo-poo, you can't possibly be right." When we sent our probe to Jupiter, we found out Dr. Humphreys was right, and Jupiter's magnetic field looks like it's only about 6,000 years old. And Dr. Humphreys made similar predictions for the planet Uranus and Neptune for their magnetic fields. Both of them should not have magnetic fields at all. They should have been long dead if they're as old as claimed to be, according to evolutionary age beliefs. Assuming a solar system age of thousands of years, like I said, Russell Humphreys did successfully predict the strength of the magnetic fields around these two planets, and that was 6,000 years. Now, even Dr. Humphreys wasn't expecting this one, and we just recently got a probe to go around Mercury in the last 5 to 10 years. The presence of a significant magnetic field around Mercury is not consistent with a supposed age of billions of years. A planet so small should have cooled down enough so that any liquid core would solidify, preventing the evolutionist dynamo mechanism that causes magnetic fields in the first place. So, 6,000-year upper limit on this one too. All right, let's zoom in a little bit and look at some smaller things around our solar system. How about Jupiter's moon, Io? Jupiter's moon, Io, has 7 volcanoes that spew plumes 60 to 120, 160 miles at velocities of 2,000 miles per hour. And according to the evolutionary model, Jupiter's moon, Io, should be stone cold. Now, Saturn's moon, Enceladus, is also volcanically active. And astronomers working in the billions of years mindset thought that this moon would be cold and dead, but it is a very active moon, spewing massive jets of water vapor and icy particles into space at supersonic speeds that are consistent with a much younger age. Calculations show that the interior would have been frozen solid after 30 million years. That's less than 1% of its supposed age, and even tidal friction from Saturn does not account for its youthful activity. And we apply that same 30 million years to as an upper limit for Jupiter's moon as well. And even these tiny little moons, let's take Jupiter's moon Ganymede as our one example. Ganymede has a very strong magnetic field around it. Magnetic fields are generated by the liquid motion of molten metal inside the body. Yet Ganymede should have cooled solid billions of years ago. This is a tiny, tiny little moon. It's like one hundredth or 1/10 at least the size of Mercury. Surely it should have cooled down. So we give this one an upper limit of 6,000 years. Well, that about does it for the permanent residents of our solar system. What about the visitors? You know, them comets that come zooming in from time to time to time. We got two types of comets. Those are short-term comets and long-term comets. We'll talk about both of those. Short-term comets have a period of less than 10,000 years. In other words, they have they have short period comets are usually less than 500 years and have a life expectancy of less than 10,000 years. So after 10,000 years, we shouldn't see any short-term comets anymore. So upper limit on those short-term comets, 10,000 years. And what about the long-term comets? You know, every time they pass near the sun, from its maximum orbit, they lose a lot of mass. So a comet, even a long-term comet, could orbit for a maximum of 100,000 years before it completely runs out of material. So that's 100,000 years is the upper limit for long-term comets. Now, evolutionists and astronomers are aware of the problem with comets, and so they came up with the imaginary hypothetical Oort cloud orbiting somewhere way, way out beyond our solar system. We can't even hardly see anything in it. In fact, we can't see anything in it. That's why they call it the hypothetical Oort cloud. It provides a vast reservoir of new comets. Whenever they, I guess, bump into each other or something, one of them will fall towards the sun. And that's the theory anyway. Yeah, it's fodder for many a scientist's career and new hubcaps. Many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution. Yet, not a shred of direct observational evidence for the existence of the Oort cloud. Yet we find a couple of bodies out there, but not a huge cloud of comets. It's just not there. This is just hooey. Oh, there I go, speaking in the vernacular again. All right, sorry I got a little excited there towards the end of the Oort cloud, started speaking in the vernacular. I apologize. Let's take a look at near-Earth asteroids. That's an interesting one. I think I'll be a little less emotional on this one. See, the maximum expected lifetime of near-Earth asteroids is on the order of 1 million years, after which they should have collided with the sun or the Earth or the moon. But they haven't. Now, this brings into question the origin of the asteroids with the formation of the solar system, the usual scenario. Or the solar system, perhaps, is much younger than 4.5 billion years. And we believe we put an upper limit on this one of, was it a million years? Yep, that's right, a million years. And this is an interesting photo here. This shows the actual trajectories of all the near-Earth asteroids that are orbiting out there. Hoo-wee! Boy, it's a bumper car race out there. We should be getting hit by these things all the time. God help us, protect us. All right, next topic, zooming in even smaller. Let's look at the lifetime of binary asteroids, where a tiny asteroid moon orbits a larger asteroid in the main asteroid belt. That's where we see these, and they represent about 15 to 17% of the total asteroids we see come in these binary pairs. Now, the tidal effects limit the life of such binary systems to about 100,000 years. So that's the upper limit, yet we see these all over the place. The difficulties in conceiving of any scenario for getting binaries to form in such numbers to keep up with the population led some astronomers to doubt their existence, but space probes confirmed it, and there is no explanation for the huge number of binary asteroids out there. Which brings us to the near-infrared spectra of Kuiper belt objects Quasar and Charon. An infrared spectra is the spectrum of infrared light we see reflected from these two bodies tells us what they are made of. Okay? Now, it tells us that both contain crystalline water ice and ammonia hydrate. Now, this watery material cannot be much older than 10 million years, which is consistent with a young solar system, not one that is 4 to 5 billion years old. So we have an upper limit here of only 10 million years on this one. All right, moving closer home, let's look at the moon. There's been recent volcanic and tectonic activity on the moon. Evidence of recent volcanic and tectonic activity on the Earth's moons is inconsistent with its supposed vast age because it should have long since cooled if it were billions of years old. Evidence of very recent geological activity and tectonic movements on the moon is inconsistent with its supposed age of billions of years and its hot origin. Thrust faulting on the moon revealed by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera. This detection, coupled with the very young apparent age of all the faults, suggests global late-stage contraction of the moon. In fact, NASA pictures support a biblical origin of the moon if you look up those references down at the bottom. And that's that cutaway view is what we really think the moon looks like inside. Yeah, it still has a molten core, which after billions of years is impossible. And last but not least, recession of the moon from the Earth. Now, currently the moon is receding from the Earth, getting farther away from the Earth by 2 inches per year. This is due to tidal forces and tidal drag, which we're not going to get into. Just take that one on faith, brothers and sisters. All right, well, 2 inches a year is not too much on a 6,000 year scale. In fact, let me figure that out. I'll figure that out by the time we get to the next slide. Trust me. All right. So 6,000 years ago, at 2 inches per year, the moon would have been 1,000 feet closer to the Earth than it is right now. Okay, big deal. It's 480,000 miles away to begin with. So, all right. But you keep going back in time, and it's not a linear progression. As the moon gets closer and closer, those tidal forces get stronger and stronger, pushing it out faster and faster. So, just a few million years ago, the force of gravity from the moon on the oceans would have been so strong as to cause tides hundreds or thousands of feet high twice a day. So life on Earth would have been destroyed by flooding twice a day, every day, just a few million years ago, if we had all really been here that long. So upper limit on the recession of the moon is just a few million years. And they try to tell us, oh yeah, that moon's been around for almost 2 billion years now. Oh, hooey. But you know what? Now that I think about it, maybe that all kind of makes some sense because, that might explain what happened to all the tall dinosaurs. They got mooned to death. All right, so that ends our secular review of everything we could look at out there in the universe outside of the Earth. It speaks to how old the Earth could possibly be and the universe using naturalism and uniformitarianism. And true to my word, I don't believe I brought up a single scripture during the whole course of that presentation. But what does the Bible tell us? Well, we saw the universe confirms the Bible. Does the Bible confirm what we see in the universe? The question is, Does the Bible tell us that the earth is flat? What? Now think about it though. If the earth was flat, flat earth eclipses would be really, really cool. But the dark truth behind the flat earth theory is that if the earth was really flat, don't you think cats would have pushed everything off the side by now? But that doesn't perturb the flat earthers because the only thing flat earthers fear is sphere itself. Oh, God help me. But seriously now, folks, the Bible tells us that the earth is round. Both Isaiah and Job speak to that. Job tells us the earth floats in space. The earth hangs on nothing. And that is how the Bible depicts the earth. And if you run into some of these flat earth theorists, do be kind to them. Realize they have been deceived into thinking that everything out there in the universe is round except for the earth, which is shaped like a pizza. But the Bible also addresses the expansion of the universe, where in Isaiah we're told, among many places, that God stretches out the heavens. The Bible speaks to the conservation of mass and energy. It speaks to the number of stars, and it speaks to the ordinances of heaven and earth, as in the laws of gravity and all those cosmic laws. So our creationist timeline now is 6,000 years ago, give or take, around 4000 BC. God created the heavens and the earth. Around 4,400 years ago, God deluged and destroyed all life on earth, with the exception of Noah and all those in the ark. And almost 2,000 years ago, we have the birth of Jesus, which brings us to today. And so for this lesson, we have successfully used the set of assumptions employed by old Earth advocates, and we have demonstrated the internal inconsistencies in that way of thinking. When we do that, we see that the weight of the evidence, even using old Earth assumptions, points towards a young Earth. All right, so going back to our upper limit question, we had a lot of upper limits that one was 200 million years. We saw maybe was there another? No, 200 million years was the oldest one we found. 200 million years is certainly not enough time for evolution, at least as the secular humanists would like to portray it. You can't get a whole lot going on in 200 million years. But that is the highest of our upper limits. We've got a lot of upper limits here of 7,000 years, 10,000 years. So looking at the upper limits, we say, the lowest of the upper limits is about 7,000 years. Okay, and remembering for that 200 million year upper limit we had on galaxies, that was the highest possible age. It could have been much, much younger. So looking at the evidence of the universe, it's a very, very, very young universe. So how could so many smart people be so wrong on this topic? Well, there are a lot of very smart people who are very right on this subject. And here's just a very short list of some of the scientists who believe in a 6,000-year-old Earth that God created in 6 days. And even more scientists who are on our side on this one. And that was just the short list. There are at least 10,000 scientists around the world that we could put on that list were we to do so today. And let's recall that scientific disciplines were all established by Bible-believing Christians, from astronomy, bacteriology, chemistry, computer science, dynamics, and electrodynamics were all established by Bible-believing scientists. Continuing, electromagnetics, natural history, oceanography, taxonomy, and thermodynamics, all scientific disciplines established by Bible-believing scientists. So let's not say that the Bible is anti-scientific. You could not be farther from the truth. And a short list of notable discoveries by Bible-believing scientists. In fact, Isaac Newton himself said there are more sure marks of authenticity in the Bible than in any profane history. I have a fundamental belief in the Bible as the Word of God, written by men who were inspired. I study the Bible daily. Thank you, Sir Isaac Newton. And the Bible tells us how so many smart people could be wrong. Romans chapter 1, verses 21 to 23 says, For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man, birds, and animals, and reptiles. A PhD does not change a man's heart. And Second Peter goes on to tell us, For this they willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. And even, boy, the Bible has a lot to say about stupid people, doesn't it? Matthew, broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. And Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And John finally says, men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. And John there is speaking of the last days, the days we're in, brothers and sisters. So what's going to happen to all those scientists and unbelievers as these last days go on? Well, I can't tell you for sure, but I do know what happened to them when they refused to believe Noah. And there they are. All right, that concludes our lesson for this week. Next week, we're going to go into all the evidence for a young Earth when we look at the Earth itself. Yes, the list goes on as if there could not possibly be more. Yes, there's a whole bunch more things we can look at that say, no, it's not billions of years old. It's not even millions of years old. So we're going to do that next week. Brother Dave here. I love you guys, and God loves you too. Have a blessed week.